Let's testify tonight.
Oh God, you've done so much for me. I'm grateful and overwhelmed here at your feet. And I could stay here forever, Lord, but you call me to something more. And I hear you say that you have a plan to use every broken woman and man to display just how good you are. We are your living pieces of art. What good does it do to hide away when all of my scars are a picture of grace? All right. So I will testify of the power of God. Tell the world of the hope I have found. For my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Oh, do you believe it? Has He done it for anyone else? I said, has He done it for anyone else? Cause the God that I serve, He's always at work. Has He done it for anyone else? So come on and testify of the power of God. Come on and tell the world of the hope we have found. For our body was broken, our hearts were made whole, and that's too good to keep to yourself. Come on and testify of the power of God. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. I'm gonna testify. Somebody testify your voice. This is my. So I'm gonna testify. Somebody testify. Come on, take it up. Jesus, my champion, the victor of grace, the only one worthy of all of my praise. Yeah. So come on and testify. Oh, somebody lift Him high. Come on, testify the power of God. I will tell the world of the hope I have found. Oh, for my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Sing it. Oh, my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Oh, let's do that right now, Murfreesboro.
And good morning, everybody. I hope that you are doing well. I see Bradley is first in the chat today, and I hopefully will get some more because, I don't know, I'm looking forward to whatever you guys have to say today. I do actually want to bring something up that is completely, I wouldn't say it's not something I've never talked about, but it's something I don't talk about regularly on this channel, at least. And that is the whole Epstein file mess and the Pam Bondi hearing and all that. I know I've mentioned it before, but I did a little bit of digging, and I'm trying to be dispassionate. I'm trying to be as analytical as I can about this without just saying, well, Trump is bad and therefore, no, none of that. I'm just trying to look at it with an open mind and open eyes and try and figure out what the heck is with all this crap. And I think I might have stumbled across something that I hadn't considered before. And it's disturbing with its implications, but it actually kind of makes sense. So I want to start with something that there's been a lot of talk about the insane amount of redactions made in the Epstein files. And I would tend to agree. The redactions are, in many cases, we'll just say excessive. I mean, because there are documents in the files where basically the entire text of the document is redacted, which makes no sense whatsoever because any kind of careful redaction, sure, you might remove names, places, identifiable information like that, but you wouldn't remove necessarily the context of the file. So, for example, if person X committed a crime and person Y was a co-conspirator with person X, and the victim of person X and Y's crime was person Z, you might block out person Z for sure because you don't want to put the victim's name out there. And hey, person X and Y you might block out if in fact they're under a current criminal investigation and you don't want to prejudice people about it. But the fact that you have this document that records an incident that took place, you would at least say what you would show what the incident was. You may not show when it took place. You could block that out. You might not show where it took place, but but you would at least acknowledge that an incident of this type did in fact take place, right? So to redact an entire file is ridiculous. And I can't remember who it was, but I heard someone, and they were just kind of rambling on about the files, and they said how the redactions seemed, in some cases, to be random. And I was like, I wonder if there's any truth to that. And didn't really give it much thought. And then for some reason, I mean, I don't really have a specific reason for it, but I decided, you know what, I'm going to start doing my own little mini investigation, and I just started digging into the files. I didn't know if I was going to find anything because there are literally millions of files, and so the odds of me finding anything significant would be pretty much zero. And I don't think I found any, there's no smoking gun here or anything like that, but I did find something that I find very, very interesting. So I was just kind of digging through the Epstein files. Most of it is extraordinarily boring, right? Hundreds upon hundreds of photographs of various locations that I presume are Epstein Island, but there's no context. Like, there's no, it's just a picture in a PDF format with no explainer. There's no document that goes along with it that says where this picture was taking place or anything like that. It's just a photo of a room. And in some cases, like there's a photo of a hallway, and sitting on a credenza is a framed photograph of what appears to be a young lady, and the face of the young lady is blocked out. And I'm like, okay. So I'm assuming that that is indeed a part of Epstein's property. But there's no description of where, like, is this on Epstein Island, or is this in Epstein's apartment, or is this in, Epstein's mother-in-law's place? We no idea. But We just get all these random pictures. And then you go on, and there's all these various documents. And again, it's there's a common tactic in law having to do with discovery. Now, discovery basically is, if you are accusing somebody of a crime and the defense attorney, in discovery, the defense attorney has to get all of the evidence that you have pertaining to the crime. And it is a common tactic of attorneys to make it as difficult as possible to sift through the discovery. And so that means if you have photographs that are part of your evidence, don't put any captions on the photos. Just throw them in a box and say, here you go, here are all the pictures we're using. And that way, if you don't know what each picture is, it makes it really hard to build a defense because you don't even know what the evidence truly is, right? There's a common types of tactics. And I think we're seeing some of that here with the Epstein files, in that since there's no context to these pictures, there's no way for you to really piece together what this is trying to show you. And so so this is where it gets kind of interesting. The same is true with all these documents, right? There's no basic. It doesn't say, "Oh, here are the documents pertaining to this," or "Here's the documents about that." It's just here's the document, but lots of stuff is redacted. And then I stumbled across a series of documents that, again, no context to them, no clue as to what they're about, except that I'm assuming that these are like HR files for Epstein's company. And the reason that I'm assuming this is because they are emergency contact forms. And I couldn't see any other reason to include emergency contact forms unless they are, Epstein's employees. And this is like the emergency contact forms that were on file in Epstein's company or on Epstein Island. And that might not seem much, and it really isn't much, because assuming, forgetting about all the craziness that was going on Epstein Island, Epstein did have several businesses, and as such would have legitimate employees of those businesses, most of which would probably have no idea of the nefarious stuff that's going on. And as such, these people would have tax forms and emergency contact forms and HR compliance forms and all the standard stuff that any employer would have. But if you're investigating everything there is to investigate about Epstein, you would, in fact, gather together all of those HR forms as a part of the overall evidence, even if the evidence isn't particularly useful. So I'm going to show you a couple of these forms. These are direct from in fact, these are actually, we're viewing them on the actual Department of Justice website. So you can go there yourself right now and view these files if you so choose. So I'm not trying to, these no way, shape, or form doctored by me. These are not even downloaded to my computer. I'm viewing them directly in on the browser on the DOJ website, just to make that perfectly clear. So, this is an emergency contact form. Very standard emergency contact form. Now, one thing to note is, okay, so this form was filled out in 2018. And interestingly enough, the employee's name, Ono Parasite, I don't know how to pronounce that properly, is obviously not redacted, right? Their date of birth is, but the name of the employee is not redacted. It's right there for you to see. So, and by the way, just like, there are literally, you know, probably hundreds of thousands of names in the Epstein files of people that did absolutely nothing wrong. And I'm sure Onel here is one of those people. And it just happens to be an employee of Epstein or one of Epstein's companies or something like that in 2018 at least. But I want to call your attention to the top line here. So we see the name of the company, LSJE LLC. What that is, I don't know, nor do I particularly care. And then immediately below that is the address of the company, as well as the phone number and fax number of the company involved, which are redacted, right? And again, I don't know anything about LSJE LLC. I don't know what kind of company they are. I'm sure you could look it up, or even if they're still in existence today. It could be a money laundering thing but because it's in St. Thomas, so a lot of stuff, a lot of companies like to set stuff up there to funnel money in and out of the country. But I don't know, no idea what it is. But I do think it's interesting that they include the full address and name of the company, but then block out the phone number and fax number because honestly, if this company is still in existence, well, with the name of the company and the address of the company, it wouldn't be that hard to look up the phone number. And I'm sure that you know you, somebody probably already has. But here's what's really interesting. So, and just to make sure that you guys know, this is the official government designation that this is EFTA 00003062.pdf in the Epstein files, right? So I'm about to go to the very next file in sequence, which so this being EFTA 00003062, the next file will in fact be EFTA 00003063, so one digit higher. It is and the other one is in fact another emergency contact form with another person not related to this person from all I can see, but also their name starts with an O, so I'm guessing they're in alphabetical order. And also for the same company and all that. So, and in fact, you can see this is, if you look, there's a ring at the top. This is kept in a binder. From the looks of it, this other form is in the same binder. So this is really interesting. So notice same company and all that. It's another emergency contact form. And this one, unlike the prior one, the phone number and fax number are not redacted. Why? There seems to be, honestly, and by the way, look, and again, we have the and it's not laminated paper. They're just, I think that's paper just kept in laminate sleeves in the binder from the looks of it. But you'll notice that a lot of the other one is similar, but a lot of the stuff. So this person is a maintenance person. Started working for Epstein. It looks like, or sorry, working. I'm sorry, not for necessarily for Epstein, for LSJE LLC on October 1st in 2016. And this one is dated 3/19/2018. The other one is 4/9/2018. But this one has no start date. This one, the person has no position, but they're married. This person has no address. The other one, it looks like the other information is filled in, but their address, phone number, and cell number are redacted, even though the phone number and fax number of the company is not. So, why in the world would the phone number and fax number from LSJE LLC be redacted in one form and not redacted in the very next form? Remember, these are sequentially next to each other within the Epstein files. One is EFTA 00003062. The other is EFTA 00003063. So they are literally side by side in the Epstein files. They redact one and not the other as far as the company phone number. So it does seem to me like either the redacting is incompetent, which I'm certainly not beyond suggesting that whoever was doing the redacting is incompetent. It's also possible that they are being deceptive, that they're trying to throw people off with all the redacting because they're redacting completely innocuous information. Because again, the phone number to a corporation is not exactly sensitive, secret information, right? So it seems like this could be a matter of trying to just throw people off by redacting things that are completely unnecessary. It could be random or AI generated redactions, that they're just redacting random things again as kind of a ruse into making people think that there is or isn't information there, or to further, like for example, here we see a redaction of information that is completely meaningless. So that means that in other forms where we have an email from, Jeffrey Epstein to Donald Trump and they're talking about whatever, then they can say, oh, well, that redaction is just as meaningless. And therefore, so it's a way to try to basically distract from more important redactions by having irrelevant redactions. And I found this really interesting. And then and then I watched some more of the Pam Bondi thing, and it kind of hit me watching her with some of the questions because obviously some of the Congress people were asking her about some of these redactions, to which she deflected every question involving the redactions masterfully. Well, by masterfully, I mean, well, I wouldn't even say master. She just deflected completely. She didn't answer them at all. They would say, "Hey, why did you not redact this, but you did redact this?" And they would say, and her response was literally, why didn't you ask the prior administration this? Or why aren't you talking about all the great things that Trump did? Or the Dow Jones hit 50,000? She would basically say anything except answer the question. And and the general consensus from people that have been critical of Pam Bondi at that particular hearing has been that she has been deceptive, that she's a shill for the administration, and that there's some kind of nefarious thing going on there, and all that. And I've kind of felt that way myself. But then I was kind of paying attention to her and the fact that Pam Bondi, keep in mind, Pam Bondi is an experienced attorney, and an experienced attorney general. She's not some person that just came in off the street with no experience. She was the attorney general in Florida for a number of years, and a very successful one. And she understands the nature of the questions being asked. She understands the answer that she should, from a legal perspective, give, and yet she's not doing it. And she knows full well, based on her experience, that she could be found criminally liable for contempt of Congress because of the types of answers that she's given. And quite frankly, if the Democrats do get the majority this fall, and Pam Bondi is not removed from office by Trump because Trump has an annoying habit of throwing people under the bus once their usefulness has worn out. But if so, she's still there, and the Democrats win. I would be surprised if she's not found in contempt of Congress, and she could serve some real jail time. And the thing is, she's fully aware of this, yet she's doing it anyway. Why would she do this? And I realize there's another alternative other than that she's a shill for Trump or that she's just being deceptive or incompetent. I can't buy the incompetence thing based on her experience. And that is, what if she's terrified? What if, because let's go hypothetically, let's rewind back a little bit to when Epstein died. And of course, for the longest time, the big thing that people would talk about is the fact that they nobody that basically thought critically about this, nobody believed that Epstein actually committed suicide. Right? Most people believed that his death was intentional. And so then the question would be why? Well, the answer to that would appear to be that Epstein had a lot of incriminating information on some extraordinarily powerful individuals. And if this is the case, then those individuals would not want to be exposed. Now, we already know, for example, Prince Andrew, right? And I'm sure that he's not the only significant world leader that was implicated. So, if if that's the case, if there were a lot of extraordinarily powerful individuals that Epstein had information on, and Epstein was about to remember, Epstein had not gone. He was not done with his criminal proceedings, which means that, like, if Epstein was afraid that he was going to go to prison for the rest of his life or something, he may well have tried to cut a deal or something like that. And so when he died, and remember, he was awaiting trial. And so what if the powerful individuals that he had information on wanted to get him out of the way because of the information that he had? Now, if that's the case, it would stand to reason that individuals like Kash Patel and Pam Bondi, and even Donald Trump for that matter, would know why Epstein died. They would know, the truth behind it. And if they've examined all the truly unredacted information, or at least the truly relevant unredacted information that they would have available to them, that they would have been able to see that no one else could have, they would know the truth. They would know who some of these extraordinarily powerful people who are implicated, they would know who they are. And these people are as rich and powerful as, the dark, Illuminati, whatever type group of people. Well, then maybe, just maybe, they don't want to have their life prematurely end either. And so if that's the case, I think that Pam Bondi might have simply been so evasive during that hearing out of a sense of self-preservation. In which case, I don't feel as angry at Pam Bondi as I was immediately after watching the hearing, because I understand. And add to this, and think about this for a second. The one chink in Trump's armor among the MAGA crowd has been the Epstein files, right? Because Trump early on said that he would release the files, and then he kind of reneged on that. And of course, Pam Bondi said she had a list of all the clients, and then all of a sudden she didn't have a list. And so people were screaming, there's a cover up. And so that's the one thing that some, not all, but some of the MAGA Republicans were upset with Trump about, including the most outspoken supporter that Trump ever had, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who then, after when Trump, you know, when because Marjorie Taylor Greene was the most gung ho, insane Trump supporter I'd ever seen, until the Epstein file thing, and she was getting angrier and angrier about the fact that it seemed like they were never going to release the files. And she was extraordinarily outspoken trying to get those files released. And then, completely out of the blue, all of a sudden, oh, I resign because of death threats to me and my family. And the funny thing about that is that if you are a sitting congressman or senator, a death threat just means it's Tuesday, right? I mean, let me be completely candid with you. I have received death threats from things that I've said online about Captain Marvel. I'm not even making that up. When I gave it was not exactly a glowing, but not exactly a scathing review of Captain Marvel. And I defended that review on Nerdrotic's show. And I'm certainly not implicating Nerdrotic, just to make this clear. It's some of his insane followers. I received multiple death threats through DMs in Twitter. And just so you know, every single one of them I reported to Twitter. And the couple that I took seriously, I actually reported to the FBI as well. But all of that being said, I didn't stop, you know, doing, and that was just over something with Marvel. So imagine if you're actually, it doesn't matter if you're left or right, whether you're a progressive, a liberal, a centrist, a conservative, a right winger, a MAGA, wherever you fall in the American political spectrum, somebody is going to hate you enough to send you death threats. And so you're going to get them. And so for Marjorie Taylor Greene to say, whoa, whoa, I quit because of death threats, to me, it was not death threats from randos that don't like her political positions. I think that she got something from someone that she took seriously. And it would kind of add up to make sense when you take her suddenly resigning from office, Pam Bondi's behavior at the hearing, Kash Patel's behavior, even Trump's behavior, could all we could be looking at a bunch of people who are scared to death. And that to me is truly the most sobering part of all this, is that there could indeed be people who are so powerful that they can intimidate people at the highest levels of government, even the nation's highest ranking law enforcement officer. So that's my whole thought on the Epstein mess thus far. So now to the chat we go. So Ariel, good to see you. Says, but if we don't have redacted files, then the SCP Foundation would have been found out with all its wrongdoing quickly. I don't know who the SCP Foundation is, but I do. You know, I have a thing when it comes to redaction. Now, and again, Pam Bondi's working out of a sense of self-preservation. I certainly understand that, but on principle, the way the redaction I think should work is that if a person is a victim of a crime, particularly a minor, like in fact, I would say only really if it's a minor. So if you which with the Epstein case, obviously there are a lot of minors involved. That name would be redacted. Other than that, I don't think that. I think that in the name of Trump, as he likes to brag, being the most transparent presidency in the history of this country, the files should be completely unredacted except for the names and personal information of any minors involved. That's just my opinion on it. Or anything that's legally required to be redacted, which there are certain circumstances in which it would be legally required. But, that doesn't really apply as far as the Epstein files because Congress wrote a specific law just for the Epstein files, and even that wasn't followed. Ariel says, it's always been a while since I was here last. Looks like you had a bunch of stuff made for your 3D modeling. Well, if you're talking about we have back here, we have the Rocketeer, Daredevil, and Batman. I've been experimenting with some basic helmets, but I didn't actually make those 3D files. Those are files that I downloaded. Eventually, I'll make some of my own. But right now, I'm just, and it's the reason I'm just downloading files is I'm experimenting with the printer right now because the printer runs on its own when I'm out driving and stuff. When I have a little bit of time, I'm going to get back into 3D modeling. Arabic then says, good morning, how you doing? Josiah says, here we go. Robert says, shalom today. Shalom, shalom, Robert. And Ariel says, are those Batman, Daredevil, and Rocketeer? Yeah, Rocketeer. Yes, Rocketeer. Batman specifically that is Batman from The Batman. And yes, that is Daredevil. And I actually have a couple more around here. I should have this up on the shelf too. I have this Mandalorian. Didn't quite come out right, but it doesn't look too bad. There. Put that there. Because this is the way. Let's see. So what's so messed up is making corn graphic images of under you. What's so mess up is making corn graphic images of underage kids is not legal. I'm not sure what you're trying to say. I mean, yes, obviously, explicit pictures of underage kids is disgusting, and anybody involved in that, I think, should, at the very least, be put in prison for life without the possibility of parole. And in fact, I would even go so far. I know this is a horrible thing to say, but I just being a father and just the way I kind of feel about it is I would make it so that anybody who is basically convicted of crimes against children of that type. So sexual based crimes involving children. I think that honestly, they should go into the general prison population, and they should be given a special bright pink prison coverall that only people who commit that type of crime get, so that every other prisoner knows exactly what they did. Because and I know you're saying, wow, oh my gosh, that's like remember the Batman branding thing from Batman v Superman. That would be just inviting other prisoners to go after him. Yes, it would. All right, and I already said the laminated paper. I think it was just paper in laminate sleeves. Maybe these lower on the totem pole aren't important enough to be cared about for redacting. Or, like you said, I think, but the thing is, it's not that how low on the totem pole it is, because like the one dude is a maintenance worker, and the fact that I don't even understand why redact their birth date, and their phone number, but and even their blood type, but not their name, right? I mean, because assuming that because they're not being accused of anything, and further, why, as far as the firm that they work for, redact the firm's phone number in one file but not in another? If the information needs to be redacted, it should be redacted on every file in which it appears. And don't tell me that you don't have, even if the redaction was done in 2018, which it wasn't. The redaction was done very recently when they released these files to Congress, just within the last couple of months. So, but even if the redaction was done in 2018, you could have had an algorithmic system detect any kind of proper name and flag it for redaction. The funny thing is that there are some sections where it seems like they go out of their way to redact people who committed crimes, but then we have a letter from an attorney saying, here's the names of these victims. None of these people give permission for their information to be out there, so please redact their names in all documents. And then all their names are listed there. And it's not redacted. It's disgusting that this was in there. And all these victims of Epstein basically got doxxed. And the funny thing is, and in fact, this came up during the Bondi hearing, it's not like nobody saw that page because one of the names on this list of like 30 odd names was in fact redacted, but all the others were not. Watch someone who cover whole JF ever since it happened. I'm not sure what you're talking about. His name is Devin Stack. Look, I'm not. Look, if I don't know who Devin Stack is, and I don't know what your point is. If you're saying I should watch this person because why? I'm not so. I'm not. I'm not going to be obsessed with the Jeffrey Epstein thing to where I want to watch other YouTubers talk about Jeffrey Epstein all day. I'll do my own research on it because from just for a personal out of personal interest, but I'm not so obsessed with it that I'm going to start watching other people's content on it. Are they blacked out or cut out? They're blacked out. They're all these redactions were done digitally, and they were done mostly just for the congressional subpoena. Looking like Trump may go to a war with Iran. The USS Gerald Ford aircraft carrier has been ordered to that region. We've got all sorts of stuff over there. I don't know if we're going to go to war with Iran or not. I really, look, I am certainly not, and this is the problem. Whenever you try to get into a discussion about this, if I say I don't think we should go to war with Iran, people say, "Oh, so you're defending Iran?" No, but the last time we got involved with Iran, we put in a puppet, a puppet leader. He was called the Shah of Iran. And everybody in Iran knew he was a puppet, and he was deposed and replaced by the Ayatollah, who has been a pain in our side ever since. And the Ayatollah that's not the name of the person; it's like his position. And so I think it was Ayatollah Khomeini or something like that was the guy back in the 80s. And I don't know what the name of the guy is today, but Iran has always been a rather oppressive government. Does that mean we should go in guns ablazing? I, on the one hand, I can see a compelling argument to say we have the ability to go in and force regime change where it would be better for the people. And, so if we can do it and it's the right thing to do, why not just do it? And so I can certainly see that argument. But at the same time, you also have Well, they're a sovereign nation. Do we really have the right to go in and tell another nation how it needs to do things? And if so, why are we picking and choosing, right? Why are we threatening Iran, but we're not doing anything about Uganda, right? Why did we, sneak in the middle of the night and kidnap the leader of Venezuela, but not North Korea? So, I think that becomes problematic. As soon as you start saying, we're going to go in because it's the right thing to do, then you need to explain to me why it's not the right thing to do in every case where the people are being oppressed. And unfortunately, we're not doing that. We're just basically we're calmly looking the other way when it comes to Kim Jong Un and his craziness. But boy, we're going to go threaten Iran. Meanwhile, the Un regime has actively, directly threatened the United States on multiple occasions and is even actively attempting to develop intercontinental ballistic missiles in which he said that he wants to use to destroy America. And what do? Nothing. But we got to go get them Iranians. Some don't smell right, is all I'm saying. Ariel says, wouldn't it not be actually a war, but more of a military action because only the Senate and Congress that can declare war? Well, yeah, only Congress can declare war. So officially, war cannot happen without congressional approval. However, and this has been a problem, and by the way, this is not a Trump thing. This has been a problem of multiple presidents in the past is that I mean the last time I mean man I don't even know, let's see when was the all right so yeah the last formal declaration of war by the United States Congress was June 5th, 1942. Think about that. 1942. Now that means that, Vietnam, Korea, Panama, both Gulf Wars, as we call them, Afghanistan, none of that was a war. They were all military actions or whatever. Which means that in every single one of those cases, the president acted without congressional authority. I would dare say that the system is broken if we can have a deluge of wars without declaring war. And quite frankly, and again, this is not a Trump thing because Kennedy did it, Johnson did it, Nixon did it, Reagan did it, Bush did it, Clinton did it. You know, it's this is not one party and this is not one president. So I think that Congress needs to actually do something about this because this is getting crazy. The President of the United States should not be. Yes, the president is commander in chief, which means that once, if we're going to war, the president is in charge of that war, not Congress. Congress doesn't get to say, here's how we're going to do it. Congress simply says, okay, here's who we're going to attack. And I would be perfectly happy if the president, secretly met with Congress and said, okay, because, they don't want to make it public, right? But Congress is most of the time not in the know. Now, in some cases, Congress does actually give permission without declaring war, such as with George W. Bush. The Senate voted 99-1. I think Ron Paul was the only dissenter 99-1 to give Bush authority to use the military as a response of 9/11. And so anybody that wants to say, oh, it's Bush's war, Congress approved it 99-1. So it was not just Bush's war. All that being said, Yeah, something needs to be done. The president, it's one thing for the president to do an emergency action, but you know what? Venezuela was not an emergency action. And just the only reason I'm picking on Trump is because this is the most recent. But Venezuela, an emergency action would mean that there was an imminent threat against the United States, and Venezuela was not getting ready to invade. People say, "Yeah, but they were sending drugs over." Okay, then why aren't we invading Mexico or Cuba? You know, or any of the other dozen countries that are shipping drugs into the United States? So I know that the obvious answer is has to do with the insane amount of oil that Trump is now promising to American oil companies, but that's but you can't say that that's an emergency. It's not. Just like illegal immigration is not an invasion, because if that's the case, then every president in the past and every president in the future will be able to just call that an invasion, so they can use the military whenever they want. At some point, the line must be drawn, and right now we have a passive Congress and a president that is like many before him, but a president that is abusing his power, but abusing his power, the Congress that's offering almost no resistance. Because the Democrats are toothless right now, and the Republicans are simply capitulating. And honestly, it's the Republicans I'm disappointed in. Because I am a conservative, and when I say that, I understand what the word means. Most people who are MAGA supporters think they're conservative. They don't know what conservative actually means if you think that Trump is a conservative, or if you call yourself a conservative and you're a MAGA supporter. Don't get me wrong, you could be right wing, but that doesn't make you conservative. So people say, well, what about issues like abortion and immigration? Those are not conservative versus liberal issues. Those can be right wing, left wing issues, but they're not conservative versus liberal issues. Conservatism simply means that you want to conserve or preserve the institution of the Constitution of the United States of America as it was originally intended by the Founding Fathers. Liberal means that you take a more liberal approach to the Constitution, in that it is a living, breathing document that you can adapt to modern times, and that the modern framers didn't necessarily intend it one way, but that's because they couldn't see the future. So when you get to things like the Second Amendment, the conservative approach is that the Second Amendment basically guarantees that everyone has the right to keep and bear arms. What are arms? Any weapon that is not regulated by treaty. Okay, so that means, yes, fully automatic assault rifles, machine guns, anything you can get your hands on, as long as it's not regulated by international treaty. What is regulated by international treaty? Generally speaking, nuclear, biological, chemical weapons. You can't use those, right? So, but outside of that, Second Amendment says you can own it. Now, the liberal approach is to say, but wait a minute, the founding fathers had no idea that there was going to, back when they framed the Constitution, when the Second Amendment was written, a rifle, you could only fire once per minute, right? And so it wasn't like today, where even a semi-automatic hunting rifle is 100 times deadlier than the best weapons when the Second Amendment was written. Let alone when you get into fully auto and all that. So the liberal approach is that we need to adapt the Second Amendment in a modern context, because the framers had no idea that weapons capable of killing large crowds of people would ever exist. The conservative approach is we have the right to keep and bear arms, period. Right? So I tend to fall on the conservative side, because the problem, the big flaw I see with the liberal side of things, is that there is a mechanism in place for when the Constitution is outdated, and that is called an amendment. And so if you want to say, well, the Second Amendment needs to be capped to not include weapons that are fully automatic or weapons that can hold more than, say, 10 rounds or whatever arbitrary number you want to pull out. And so if you want to say that, that's fine. Then you have to draft a constitutional amendment that says, in regards to the Second Amendment, it shall not apply to weapons capable of firing more than 1 round per second or something like that, and capable of storing more than 8 rounds in a single loading, or some language to that effect. And you can even say, or a caliber larger than, whatever you want to put. So you can limit the Second Amendment, but you have to do it with another constitutional amendment, not by just saying that's not what they meant. So that's liberal versus conservative. So as far as left wing, right wing, that's when you really get into some of these social issues, and that's where Trump is masterful at manipulation, because what he does is he throws out a couple of hardline right wing issues, primarily immigration and abortion. And that's what wins over his base, because those are emotional gut punch issues that people can get behind. Then he throws in some snappy slogans like "Let's make America great," and bam, you got yourself a great populist right wing candidate. But he's nobody's conservative. And so, going back to what your initial question was about, Ariel, so I take the conservative approach. Yes, only Congress can declare war, but we've gotten to a point where declaring war is meaningless. We don't need to declare war. Nobody says the Vietnam military action, right? Everybody knows it's the Vietnam War. Everybody knows it's the Korean War. Everybody knows there was the first Gulf War and the second Gulf War. Everybody knows that there was the war in Afghanistan. These are all wars, and yet not one of them was declared as a war. So we need to change that. Congress needs to put some frickin' teeth back into themselves. But the problem is, it takes both parties working together to enforce the Constitution. The Republicans can't just sit on their hands because there's a Republican in the White House. You can't tell me that the Republicans in Congress right now don't see that what Trump is doing is pushing the limits of the executive power. And the problem is, and this is something I actually sent in a letter to my own senator, Marsha Blackburn, that they're not stopping to consider that you think it's great because Trump is doing all this awesome stuff that you believe in. What are you going to do if, AOC or Jasmine Crockett or someone else, some rising star from the Democratic Party, takes office in a couple of years and starts doing the same thing from the left, right? And I will tell you, all you people that are trumpeteering when Trump is doing one more thing after another that's an executive order that is a stretch or outright violation of his duly appointed constitutional powers. All you people that are cheering him on and saying how awesome it is, keep in mind, you do not want Jasmine Crockett in the White House, because not only will she reverse everything that Trump has done, but she will have social reform like you have never seen and never even imagined possible. Because you know what Obama didn't do? He didn't put in universal health care by executive order, right? He didn't try to do all this stuff through executive orders like Trump has basically tried to enact many of his policies. And if you stand behind him using executive order for major things like he's been doing, then that means that when the Democrats take power, which sooner or later they will, they're going to do the same thing. And at that point, you're going to scream and cry about how horrible it is. And I will be sitting here going, you know what? I told you so. Oh, and sorry, Robert points out, yes, even though Korea and Vietnam weren't officially sanctioned like that, they're still called wars. Yeah. there's a lot of conflicts that we call war that aren't officially wars, and that needs to change. It's likely, it likely is Jeffrey Epstein might still be alive. I've heard people suggest that. Look, I'm sure he's living in a log cabin with Elvis and Marilyn Monroe and Jim Morrison. I'm not interested in conspiracy theories about that. So, I understand that there are people that believe that Jeffrey Epstein is still alive. But without evidence, it's just a conspiracy theory. And if you had evidence that he was still alive, more people would be talking about it. Now it's looking like Trump administration is preparing for an eventual war with China now. That would be disastrous for both countries. And so I hope that doesn't happen for the sake of both us and the Chinese. Eventual war, although I doubt it, the only kind of war would be another Cold War. So it would be a lot of pointing fingers at each other and stating that they're all the evil in the world. I hope you're right about that, Ariel, because a shooting war with China, it would be disastrous. The only way we win a shooting war with China is if China tries to invade the United States. That's the only way we can win, is if we have home court advantage. We try to invade China or we fight on some third party grounds, we will lose. We simply don't have the manpower unless we go nuclear. And if we go nuclear, then we can all kiss our butts goodbye. Like what the USA did with the USSR for a good 70 years. I don't think it was 70 years. Well, let's see. It was from like the 50s. So the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. So 40 years. Let's see. Joshua Brown in the house says, good morning. How you doing, my friend? Ariel then says, the SCP Foundation is a bunch of stories put together by internet people from horror to sweet and everything in between, which are actually pretty neat. Okay, never heard of them. And then Brutix Edicts, Brutus is it possible that a person to be put into a position where they need to sacrifice their eternal life in order for another to have it? That's actually a very interesting question. So is it possible for a person to sacrifice their eternal life so that someone else can have eternal life? And I would say the answer is no. At least not from a Christian perspective. Because there's no action that you could take that would cause you to lose your eternal life that in fact would guarantee someone else to get eternal life. Because the only way, according to the Christian system, to gain eternal life is to put your faith and trust in the Messiah. Now, if you refuse to do this, you will not have eternal life. If you do it, you will have eternal life. It's not a matter of good or bad or earning points for this or not. And you can't, and and this is something that is very clear in Scripture. The only person who can sacrifice themselves for another, as far as for an eternal punishment is concerned, is the Messiah himself. So, no, I don't believe that is possible. It is an interesting idea. You might argue that a person might be able to at least petition God, for example, to say, hey, I know that, like, let's say you have a child that committed some horrible crime, and you say, Lord, I know that, my child did this. So please, Lord, if there's any punishment in this life, give it to me. I will gladly take it instead of my child, right? Because I raised them or whatever. And God may grant you that request. But whether the child goes into paradise or is condemned has nothing to do with that, because the only factor in going to paradise or being condemned is, did you put your faith and trust in Jesus Christ, not whether or not you accept the punishment for a crime. Someone in your last stream left you a comment asking you why you believe in something that doesn't exist. As far as I know, I don't believe in something that doesn't exist. Let's see. And then Brudic says nukes versus no nukes. If you're talking about a war with China, nukes is a draw and everybody loses. No nukes, the Chinese win unless China invades the United States, in which case we could defend. Is this not because the president is commander in chief? Well, the president is commander in chief, but people confuse. Like, for example, what the commander in chief is actually just. I don't know if you're over in the military, Brutix, but I was, and in the military, you go by a system of rank, right? So the lowest rank is if in the army, because that's the branch I'm most familiar with, because that's the branch I was in. But in the army, the lowest rank is a private, an E1 private. And so then it goes from private to, you go to PFC, private first class, you go to corporal or specialist, depending on your career track. You go to the various sergeant ranks, which goes all the way up to master sergeant of the Army is the single highest enlisted rank. Then you get into the officer ranks, and the lowest level officer outranks the highest level enlisted. So you have the O1 rank of second lieutenant, then you have O2 first lieutenant, then you have captain, major, lieutenant colonel, colonel, and then the brigadier general, major general, lieutenant general, and then general. General is what you would commonly refer to as a 4-star general. Then you have general of the army, which is a 5-star general, which generally speaking, we only have a 5-star general in a time of war. Then beyond that, there's only one more rank, and that is commander in chief. So commander in chief is the single highest rank in the United States military. And the commander in chief is not an army rank because commander in chief is over all branches of the military. And I have to say all branches because I'm not going to put a number there because you can debate about how many there are. Because currently there's Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, and Space Force. Right. So, but and the commander in chief is the highest ranking officer in all of those. Now, all that being said, none of those ranks gives anyone the right to give an illegal word or an illegal order. So, a sergeant outranks a private, but a sergeant cannot order a private to break into a person's home and steal some stuff. Right? That would be an illegal order, and the private would then be under a moral and legal obligation to disobey the order. The only defense that the private has if taken to court for breaking into that house, because if you remember, there's the Nuremberg thing. You can't just say, I was just following orders. You have to take account for what you do. And so the only defense is to show that the person had a reasonable belief. It's kind of like when we talked about the whole ICE shootings and stuff and what a reasonable belief of something is. Did the private have a reasonable belief that they were following a legal order at the time? If so, then the responsibility then falls solely on the sergeant. If not, then the private goes to prison, as does the sergeant. Now, the sergeant is going to go to prison for a longer term, but they'll both be punished. But at any rate, so this goes all the way up the chain, right? So a 4-star general, or let's just go 5-star. Let's just say, because there can only be one 5-star at any given time. You can have multiple 4-star generals, but only one 5-star. And so if you have a 5-star general, this person outranks everybody in the United States Army. And they can order anybody in the Army because they literally outrank anybody. And nobody can give them direct orders except for the commander in chief. But if this 5-star general orders an invasion of, I don't know, Brazil, just picking a random country, right? So this 5-star general goes to his 4-star generals and said, I want you to draft war plans. We're going to invade Brazil. Now, the 4-star general may, and depending on how the five-star general puts it, he may be under the impression that the five stars working under the authority of Congress and the President of the United States, and so the four-star may do it. But the five-star does not have the authority to do this unilaterally. He cannot simply order an invasion, even though he technically has the authority to from the four-star general's perspective. Likewise, the commander in chief, the president of the United States, has the ultimate authority in the military. And so theoretically, he can go to the five-star general or his four stars or whoever. He'd probably go to the Joint Chiefs, which is the highest ranking officers in all the branches together, and go to the Joint Chiefs and say, okay, guys, here's the deal. We're going to invade Brazil. And so I want a plan by Tuesday morning, ready to be enacted by Friday morning, right? And so he gives them the orders. Now, generally speaking, these guys are going to assume, because you're talking about the commander in chief, that these orders come with all proper authority. But that doesn't mean that the commander in chief is simply a god, right? The commander in chief still has to work within the framework of the UCMJ and the Constitution of the United States of America. And the Constitution says that only Congress shall declare war. And so if the commander in chief orders an invasion of another country, which we've had multiple instances from both parties and different presidents of doing, I'm not just saying Trump is the only one. When the commander in chief does this, that is a violation of the Constitution of the United States. But what does Congress do? Nothing. We just let it go. And that needs to end immediately. But nobody in Congress has the problem is, and this is true of both parties. Both parties are a bunch of disgusting sycophants, in my opinion. Because what we see is that doesn't matter, like if Democrat or Republican, irrelevant. Whatever party the commander in chief is, all of the people in that party in Congress are going to go along with whatever he does, unless it's so egregious that they just can't, right? But generally speaking, like that's why right now the Republicans see full well that what Trump is doing is illegal, but they're turning a blind eye to it because he's on their team, right? And if Biden were doing something illegal, it would be the exact opposite. The Democrats would all be going along with it, and the Republicans would be screaming about it. And that's why whenever either party starts screaming about how horrible the current president is, they may have the most valid points in the world, but it sounds so empty because you know that 4 years ago, it was the exact opposite. And honestly, I think the best example of this kind of hypocrisy it goes back a few years, but you guys are old enough to remember COVID. When COVID happened, Trump was president, and Trump shut down the government. He instituted government bailouts, and he fast-tracked a vaccine that was already under development for several years in order to get it to the public as soon as possible. Okay. Fast forward a few months, right? Election happens. Now Biden is the president. What does Biden do? Well, he continues with the Trump policy of mask mandates, government shutdowns, and stimulus checks that also came from Trump again. So he's doing the exact same stuff, right? And he continues the work on the vaccine, gets it out to the people. Basically, Biden does all the same stuff that Trump did. And yet, during the Biden administration, during the first year of the Biden administration, all the Republicans were screaming about Biden giving all these bailouts. They were screaming about Biden doing all these oppressive things to people because in the name of health. And they were screaming about how this vaccine was this untried, untested, thing that is going to kill us all. When just a few months earlier, it was the Democrats screaming that Trump was giving away all this money, that Trump was trying to give us a vaccine that wasn't going to work, that Trump was doing all the, mind blown. Because it was amazing to me to watch, and this is really the epiphany in my life about politics and how I lost not that I didn't put my faith in politics, but all my faith in politics was destroyed when I realized that all of the Republicans were pro vaccine and all the Democrats were anti vaccine until the election, and then all of a sudden, all the Republicans became anti vaccine and all the Democrats became pro vaccine. A public health crisis was happening. People were literally dying, and the only thing the idiots in Congress cared about was whether the person in the White House was a Republican or a Democrat. And that goes for every single member of Congress. It is not a Republican issue. It is not a Democrat issue. It is a partisan politics issue. And it is absolutely shattering our system right now. And I will not be surprised if the United States of America completely collapses within a generation because of this. All right, so moving on. Robert says solitary reason being apparently Iran is starting up their nuclear program again somehow. Okay, so why aren't we attacking Korea? They've been boasting about their program. I'm serious. Why pick on Iran when Korea is a more clear and present danger? Indeed, comes from the word conserve. Yes, indeed. And that's the funny thing. Conserve, conservative, liberal. These words have meanings, people, and it's not that liberal doesn't mean evil, and conservative doesn't mean good, and vice versa, right? Uh, it's how you view the Constitution. Period. It's a philosophical statement, and neither one is necessarily right or wrong. It's an opinion, nothing more. Mr. Six versus Michael Jackson in a dance-off. I've seen Michael Jackson dance. Nobody outdances Michael, except for the guy that Michael stole his moves from. Fosse, I think his name was. Um, Speaking of child that is that I assume that's committed a horrible crime. Just a few days ago, an 11-year-old boy shot and killed his stepdad over a Nintendo Switch. It's funny. Me and the wife were just talking about how do you deal with child criminals. Because theoretically, parents are responsible legally for all the actions of their underage children, which means that if you have a 16-year-old who commits a heinous crime, the parent can be held liable for that crime. And so, and then you run into situations where you see it's an 11-year-old that's really young, but let's say you have a 14, 15, 16-year-old who commits murder or forced sexual contact, and so one of these heinous crimes. And what happens? They go to juvie for a couple of years, and they turn 18. The records are sealed, and and they get out way too early and supposedly to live a normal life, where many of them commit the same crime again. So, is there a solution? I think that the we should start taking into account an age of accountability for minors. So, minors are still under the guardianship of their parents, so they can't make, say, financial decisions on their own and stuff. However, I would say that a child, at least at the age of 12, there will be no sealing of criminal records at that point. If a child 12 or older commits a felony, it is on their permanent record and they are tried and punished as an adult. Now, what you could do is say that until their 18th birthday, they have to stay in a juvenile detention facility, but then they're transferred to an adult prison on their 18th birthday, where they will serve out the rest of their sentence, and they will be sentenced based on the established minimums as an adult. But I also believe the established minimums are way too weak. Stepdad said it was bedtime and no Nintendo Switch in the bedroom. Yeah, well, I know people think it's terrible to suggest, but I think that our obscenely violent media, not just video games, but all sorts of media that's just so insanely violent, has desensitized people to the point where shooting somebody in the face is just natural. And but we want to deny this so that we can play whatever Call of Duty or something. The prosecutor's trying to get him tried as an adult. Well, he's probably would spend the rest of his life in prison. The problem is that ain't gonna. 11-year-old probably not gonna happen. So if someone doesn't have eternal life, what will their existence be? E.g., eternal damnation, which would be eternal life, just not a good one, or no existence at all. Your thoughts, Bill? There's a lot of brilliant people, far more brilliant than me, that have weighed in on the subject, but I do actually have a strong opinion on it. While I'm not a follower of doctrines, there is a doctrine that parallels what I believe, and that doctrine is called annihilationism. And the idea is that at the point of and based on what it actually says in the Bible, everyone shall be resurrected at the time of judgment, meaning that everyone who is dead will live again. Now, at that point, there are two judgments that take place. The first judgment is crucial. The first judgment is the heaven or hell judgment, right? I don't like that we use the word heaven, but it's what we use in the vernacular. The Bible really describes it as paradise, as a perfected earth, if you will, an earth that is not fallen as this one has. But so those that have put their faith, because basically here's the problem: everybody, without exception, would not pass God's standard of perfection, right? Everyone has sinned, and the penalty of sin is death. And notice, like if you look at the Old Testament, crime after crime after crime, punishment is death, right? And especially consider adultery, right? Adultery, punishment is death. And then Christ goes so far as to say, if you look at someone lustfully, you have committed adultery in your heart. So you're just as guilty of adultery if you're just looking at people lustfully as opposed to actually doing the deed. And so that means that anybody who has gone through puberty and actually has a sex drive is probably guilty of adultery. And so, because you can't say you've never looked at somebody with lust. And if you do say that, then you have no sex drive at all. That's the only, which there are people like that, but that's an abnormality. So if we just look at adultery, that means that's convict almost everybody right there, and that means death is the appropriate punishment. So at the first judgment, however, there is an advocate, and that advocate is Christ. And so if you have accepted that Christ already paid that punishment, the punishment of death has been paid by Christ for all sin. That's the whole point of the cross. Then you do not need to be punished at that judgment. And so you get to go into paradise. Doesn't mean you were a good person or a bad person. It just means that you accepted that gift from Christ. And then, of course, in order to do that, you have to accept that Christ was really the Son of God and all that. Which, of course, would presuppose that you believe that there's a God. But anyway, so you go into paradise. What if you didn't accept Christ? Not just there are atheists, or there are people that simply reject Christ as being Messiah, or whatever the case may be. Well, then, the punishment for those sins is death, not torture for eternity, but death. And the way that the book of Revelation describes it, in fact, let's, because we haven't done a scripture reading, let's do one real quick, because this is a good thing to talk about. Let's see. Okay. I want to make sure I get it right. All right, looks like it's in 2014, but we'll see in just a second. Logging into my Bible app, bear with me. And we go to the last book of the Revelation, which is 20. And let's see if this is it. Yes. So here we go. Let me switch screens here. All right. So this is the book of Revelation, last book of the Bible, chapter 20, specifically starting at verse 11. Then I saw a great white throne and him who was seated on it. The earth and the heavens fled from his presence, and there was no place for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and the books were opened. So all the people who had ever died are there. And keep in mind, this is basically after everybody on Earth is pretty much wiped out. So this is all people of all time. The sea gave up the dead that were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead that were in them. So basically, it's saying that everybody who died anywhere at any time are standing before the throne, and these books are open. And each person was judged according to what they had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. The lake of fire is the second death. Anyone whose name was not found written in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire. So, if in fact you're and the way, how do you get your name written in the book of life? Jesus, right? So, and that's in other parts. I'm not going to do a whole thing on that, but so if you accept Christ, your name is in the book of life. You are welcomed into paradise. If you don't accept Christ, your name is not in the book of life, and you are cast into the lake of fire. Now, many people, that this is where some of the imagery of hell being this furnace comes from, is that it's described as a lake of fire, but it also describes it as the second death. And it would seem that this is a form of execution, that at that point all those that did not accept Christ are summarily executed, and that is the end for them. Right? They are not, even though, like in verses where it says things like the fire will never be quenched or and stuff like that, it's just talking about the sheer volume of people that are cast in. It's just like this. It's not. If it's kind of like it's a form of hyperbole or whatever you want to call it, but it's when you're trying to use descriptive terms to just show the volume of something. You don't necessarily, this isn't a science book. It's not going to say, and there were 16,375,432 people thrown into this. No, it's just going to say there was so many people that the fire could never be quenched. Right, so that's where that comes from. Doesn't mean that you're kept alive and in agony for all eternity. Rogue Obi-Wan says, "Hail, hail, Rogue Obi-Wan. Hope you are well today. Sorry, I was watching us losing in hockey. I'm sorry. What did I miss? Oh, I actually showed some of the Epstein files and showed the interesting contradictory redactions. Just wish I invested in plexiglass in 2019. I wish I had some right now. Not for security or safety, but I was actually thinking about, I'm working on some of my math equations to be able to write them on plexiglass in front of the camera, so that I could do it in streaming and stuff. Don't you decide? Don't you decide on healthcare based on who's in power? Not me personally. The health care plan that I have was provided by my employer. I should say my former employer. But they're the ones that provided it. And I didn't choose it per se. And Medicare is there regardless of what party is in power. They won't trust it if Trump suggests it. Well, yeah, Democrats won't trust anything Trump suggests, and Republicans won't trust anything a Democrat suggests. That's just the way it is. America's going to fall hard. Unfortunately, I think that that's true. You tell them to go outside and cut a switch. Oh, yeah, for punishment. Give the misbehaving kids a good learning. Roman Emperor versus Han Dynasty. Oh, the Roman Empire versus the Han Dynasty. I don't know the statistics on the size of their various militaries, so I couldn't give an honest answer there. Rome was extremely powerful, though, and also it's going to depend on the statistics of the battle. Is one invading the other, or are they meeting on neutral ground and it's just military versus military? Good thing I checked the table. He hasn't been this early in a while. Oh, the tube. Sorry. Yeah, I was on time today. I try to be every once in a while. Figured everyone be busy watching Canada lose to the States in Olympic hockey gold medal game. Oh, I didn't really. Canada and the States in gold medal, and Canada's losing. Suck on that, Canucks. AP persona non grata in the House says, if merely feeling a draw towards something and imagining it for a moment, but then deciding not to act upon it is the same as acting upon it, then Jesus failed the test put to him in the desert. You're confusing that with lust. And that's a common misconception. Temptation is not a sin, and that's something that's very clear throughout the Bible. So, temptation is, let's just say, you happen to find tall women with large breasts very attractive, and so there's a tall woman with large breasts that walks past. That's a temptation. Now, lust is the conscious, intentional following of that temptation. It doesn't mean you're acting upon it. But for example, you might start going, yeah, you know what I'd like to do? She's nice and tall, so I could come up and do. And so you would start imagining what you might want to do and indulging yourself in that. That's where you start crossing the line into lust. It's a conscious decision. Simply being attracted to something is not a sin. So, and that's where like a lot of people get confused on the homosexual issue, where it is not a sin to be attracted to people of the same sex, but it's what you do with that attraction. Okay. All right. Sorry, important message. But yeah, and what you do is not just what you physically do; it's what you intellectually, emotionally do as well. But it is a conscious choice always. Just as importantly, the entire reason young people feel unexpected surges of lust, which is a feeling, is because of healthy biology. And again, having an attraction to something is different than indulging in it. And by the way, yes, people have always found people that their sexual proclivities attractive. That's nothing new. Never has been. However, good parenting, good schooling, and good ethics tend to help people discipline that. That's also why there's such a thing as the age of accountability. You are not expected to be fully in control when you are going through puberty. That's why, really, generally speaking, the when you look at it goes back to the Jewish traditions of when a girl becomes a woman or a boy becomes a man, right? They have a whole ceremony about it and all that. At that point, they are accountable for their own choices. At that point, they are no longer given a pass when it comes to those things. And so it's considered that you need to basically, as the parents, educate your kids about what is appropriate and what is not. And the point that Christ was trying to make is not that you're a good person or a bad person if you think about someone with lust. It's that nobody is without sin. Let's see. Thus, we do not owe the Creator an apology or guilt or moral debt for the biological reflexes we didn't choose to have. You know what? If you don't, and again, this is a very basic misconception of the difference between lust and being attracted to something. Lust is not simply being attracted to, at least when you're talking from a biblical perspective. And the problem is that yes, I know words are fluid and change meaning over time and stuff, but that's why we have to look at it's kind of like when we talk about being conservative or liberal, talking about the Constitution. We have to take a conservative approach to Scripture. And I don't mean conservative politically. I mean that we need to look at what the original intent was and not try to apply presentism. It's not about what the words mean today. It's about what the words meant 2,000 years ago. And of course, they weren't written in English anyway. And so it's about what is the connotation of the actual words involved. And so when we talk about lust, we're not just talking about attraction. So being gay is not a sin. Simply being attracted to something is not a sin. But what you do with that sin, or not sin, but what you do with that attraction can be. Let's see. With all that being said, I suppose I should leave before I get gaslit about it. So, this is just another example of someone who decides to show up, drop something that they think will get a reaction, and then leave because they are too cowardly to actually engage in a discussion about it. Fine. You don't want to actually have a discussion, then don't show up, please. That was a huge waste of time because someone and I just I'll get you just saying Robert, but as far as people like this, and and by the way, AP, if you happen to still be listening, you're not the only one. People on both sides of every debate do this kind of thing. But if you have what you think is a great point to make, if the other person has an explanation, that's not necessarily gaslighting. However, what I'm trying to do is to make sure you understand the difference between lust and simple attraction. But instead, you just want to drop what you think is this awesome truth bomb and run away without having a discussion. To me, that's just, I mean, chicken feces is probably the first thing that comes to mind. But seriously, if you want to have a discussion about it, don't be afraid to have a discussion. The problem is you need to approach a discussion open minded, and this goes for any discussion that any two people are having. If you are not open minded enough to listen to what the other person has to say, then you know opening your mouth while your ears are closed is you are be whatever you think the other person is at their worst is exactly what you are being. Anyway, Robert Duvall passed away a few days ago. Jesse Jackson passed away a few days ago. Also, up to you if you want to get into Jesse Jackson's ways and beliefs. Jesse Jackson was an interesting guy. He passionately believed in social justice, and I applaud him for that. Generally speaking, however, he also and by the way, I remember when he ran for president a couple of times. Unfortunately, he was also swayed by the liberal mentality on a lot of political issues, and I think he's wrong about that. But I don't think that I kind of look at him in some ways as almost a black Jimmy Carter. And they were similar in multiple ways. Both of them had a religious background, and I think both of them acted out of what they felt was genuine injustice and trying to resolve them. The problem was is that they also bought into some of the lies about partisan politics, and so that was unfortunate. However, I appreciate the fight that he was trying to fight, even if I disagree with some of his methods and some of his conclusions. As for Robert Duvall, I didn't realize he had passed away as well. And, great actor. Not much else to say about him, except that it's, too bad. Street Preacher is saying to AP, well, I think that historically humans were designed to start reproducing as early and often as possible. Well, yeah, if you look at biblically, people like Mary was probably in the order of between 12 and 15 years old when she married Joseph and when she gave birth to Jesus. And and this was not atypical of the time because girls would generally it's funny because this is one of those things that I get on people for railing on the prophet Muhammad about this is that in Muslim culture. 'Cause a lot of people say, oh, Muhammad was a pedophile because he married people who were very young, and he's like young as like 9 years old or whatever, and that was not uncommon. What would typically happen is that it would be almost like if you look at in Star Trek, Spock and T'Pring were married, but in the Jewish sense, when they were but small children, and then later they would come together and consummate this marriage. And people confuse that, and because they're engaging in presentism and thinking about marriage as the way it is today, as opposed to how the way it was 2,000 years ago. Chances are Mary and Joseph were married for several years prior to our first seeing them in the text of the Bible. However, the what would typically happen is once the men were generally much older, because the man's job was to go out and build a house, if you will, to build a stable place for his future wife. Once he had done so, and this is by the way why there were so many widows in those days, because the men would die long before their wives unless their wife died during childbirth. But the and women would get married as soon as they went through puberty because they needed to start having kids as young as possible, because the younger you are when you have a child, the more able your body is to A, survive the birthing process, and B, recover from the birthing process. And of course, back then, having many children was the only way to really guarantee your family would survive. So chances are Mary was probably 8 to 10 years old when they were actually married, but they had not yet come together as husband and wife at the time that Christ was born. And so that's why she was a virgin. I know some people complain that they say, oh, well, if you look at the quote from Isaiah, it was really just young woman, not necessarily virgin. But if you look at the term young woman contextually back then, it meant virgin. But people want to have stupid fights over nothing. At any rate, so Mary and Joseph were married, but not consummated at that point. But generally, they would consummate the marriage as soon as the girl went through puberty, which and went through the cleansing ritual and all that after their first period. Let's see. Now we artificially delayed reproduction. Yes, we absolutely do now, and in fact, we've done it to an extraordinary and absurd amount to where women. I talked to a young woman the other day driving my Uber, and she was like in her mid 30s, and she's talking about, oh, maybe I'll start having kids when I turn 40 or something. And it's like, wow, that's just insane to me, because now we're pushing it back to the point where it becomes dangerous, to both the mother and child. And the later you go, the higher the chances are that the child will have certain types of genetic defects and stuff like that. But people are pushing it back, not because of any practical reason like you might think, but honestly, just because they want. It's inconvenient to have kids. They want to party as much as possible, and I understand that, but it's kind of a problem. But the sex drive is still there as soon as you hit puberty. Yes, and the sex drive is there for a reason. And ain't over till it's over. Now, now tied 1v1 in the final period. Speaking of periods, Jimmy Neutron versus Dexter from Dexter's Lab. Well, Jimmy Neutron certainly has is older than Dexter. I'm pretty sure they're both prodigies, but Dexter does have a significantly larger lab and has made some ridiculous things. They both made ridiculous things, but Dexter, I think, has gone over the top with some of his like mechs and stuff like that. So I'm going to give it to Dexter. Plus, he's got the accent. And this, the is isn't the struggle part of being human. I don't think AP person non grata is actually even interested in a real conversation. Street. I appreciate you trying to talk to them, but I will be really surprised if AP responds to anything because AP is just a troll. Getting his kicks off of leaving a couple of comments and running away because they have no real ability to have a conversation. So it's okay to be gay in your heart as long as you don't act on it. Well, I think in your heart is kind of a weird way to phrase it, but I'm just saying that the attraction to people of the same gender is not in and of itself sinful. It is when you act upon it both on a conscious level or a physical level that it is sinful. Now, I do understand that it seems like you're playing semantics and stuff when you start talking about some of this stuff because it's really hard to nail down exactly when is it a sin, when is it not a sin. But generally speaking, sins are not oopsies. In that when you sin, it is an intentional thing. So, you are not, it's not a sin to be, let's say that instead of sex, we're talking about, the old classic chocolate and vanilla ice cream, right? So, vanilla ice cream is considered good and blessed and righteous. Chocolate ice cream is considered sinful. Now, it is not a sin to prefer chocolate ice cream over vanilla. However, it would be a sin to consciously consider chocolate ice cream over vanilla. And what would the way to avoid said sin is when you see chocolate ice cream and vanilla and you're faced with that choice, you can either choose to have vanilla despite your preference for chocolate or to abstain from ice cream. But when you're presented with that choice, if you start going, not chocolate ice cream, that's when you delve into the kind of sin that Christ is talking about when you're committing it in your heart. When you start fantasizing about eating that chocolate ice cream, when you start envisioning the spoon going to your mouth and consuming that delicious chocolate, that's when you're committing a sin, not simply the fact that you prefer chocolate. Isn't that the opposite of most Christians thinking, where it's usually what's in your heart that's what's important? Well, what's in your heart is important, but you confuse when Christ talks about what's in your heart. It's not about just basic, like what AP was talking about, just reflexive reactions to things, right? So, for example, it's not a heart issue uh, to to prefer any one thing over any other thing. It's a heart issue to indulge yourself psychologically, mentally, spiritually, leading yourself to doing something physically. Uh, and so that's, it's kind of like, what you dwell on in your thoughts eventually become your actions. So what's in your heart is important because what was happening and the reason that the heart issue came up so much in the New Testament is that by the first century, Jewish philosophy and tradition had become a rather sterile remnant of what it was originally meant to be. And you can see that in Judaism today, by the way. If you look, not all Jews are like this, of course, but many are. And that it has become just a set of rules and traditions with nothing in here about it, right? Nothing, you don't really care. You just do it because this is what you're taught to do, right? Thou shalt not kill. Why? Well, because the law says thou shalt not kill. Now, granted, I know that people say, "Well, you mean if it wasn't for God, everybody'd be running around killing people?" Not necessarily, but we'd probably have a lot more murder than we do if people didn't really think of it as a moral problem. But the idea is that, are you doing something because it's the rules, or are you doing something because you genuinely want to do the right thing, because you genuinely care about your moral standing and stuff. So I like to use the modern day metaphoric example of speed limits, right? Driving down the freeway here in Tennessee, speed limit's generally 70 miles an hour. So when I'm on the freeway, how fast do I drive? 70 miles per hour. Not 75, not 77, you go 70 miles an hour. And so now, just like anybody, sometimes your foot might slip and you might go a little bit faster. That's not where the sin issue comes in. Where the sin issue comes in is when I start going, I could get there faster if I went 75. So it's not the like if somebody just likes driving fast, that's not a sin. But in considering driving over the speed limit, it is. Now, further, what's your motivation for only driving 70? Is your motivation for driving 70 just not getting a ticket? If so, that's not in your heart, right? But if your motivation for driving 70 is that you want to obey the law, right? You genuinely want to obey the law, then it is in your heart correctly. And what's interesting is you can easily see the difference in people's behavior. If, in fact, the only reason that they drive 70 miles an hour is to avoid getting a ticket, then they will almost always drive 75, maybe 78, 79, because they fooled themselves into thinking that there is this rule that police won't pull you over unless you're doing at least 5 or 10 miles over the speed limit. And so then, and by the way, yes, so a lot of times police won't bother pulling you over if you're only going a couple miles over the speed limit, but that doesn't mean they can't. If they wanted to, they could pull you over if you're going 71. So it's best to not do it. But people whose sole motivation is not getting a ticket, they usually go a few miles per hour over, but they'll ease off the gas pedal if they see a cop because they don't want to get a ticket, right? That's the only thing going on in their heart. And then there are some people that just don't care. And so they'll buy the fastest car they can, take the license plates off and go 120 and say, catch me if you can. Which those people are just jerks. Doing something good for the wrong reason. Yeah, that's what I was just kind of covered. So yeah, you drive the speed limit because you want to obey the law, not because you're afraid of the punishment for disobeying the law. And it's the same thing with Christ and the various rules, if you will, of the Bible. You should be a sexually moral person, not because it says to, but because you want to please Christ. That is a righteous reason to, is out of the desire to do what Christ wants in our lives, not just because I have to and I don't want to go to hell. Because here's the good news of the gospel: if you've accepted Christ, you ain't going to hell. So now that you've gotten that out of the way, are you going to desire to please Christ? Or are you just going to do whatever you want to do? Your choice, free will. Robert Duvall and Apocalypse Now. I love the smell of napalm in the morning. I know that movie was based on a real life military individual. I don't think it was based on a specific individual, but it was based on some interesting things. Or is it okay to wish someone was dead as long as you don't kill them, or is wanting that the real sin? Well, here's the thing. Like, there are times when if somebody makes you angry, right? Like, a politician says something that just infuriates you, Or you get mad at me because, I'm sitting here spouting religious nonsense or whatever it is, right? So, and your instinctive reaction is, I could just kill that person, right? Now, that instinctive reaction is not a sin. Where it becomes a sin is what's your next thought, right? So when that jerk cuts you off in traffic and you're like, oh, I would love to just ram my car right into them. Okay, so then do you start fantasizing about it? Now you're getting into some, or let's say someone's driving really fast down the freeway and you say, man, I hope they get into an accident. Then what's your next thought? Do you start thinking how great it would be to drive by as their car is a burning wreck and the person is crawling from the wreckage with one leg or something? Are you fantasizing about that, or and by the way, I drive a lot, so I've been guilty of this plenty of times. So somebody cuts me off and I get mad for a second. I said, man, I hope that guy gets into a wreck. And I said, oh, Lord, please, forgive me for that. I don't really want him to get into a wreck, you know, when your intellect kicks in. So your initial emotional reactions to things is not a sin because you don't directly control your emotions. You can train your emotions though. And the thing is, and I think this is why Christ talks about the idea of identifying a tree by its fruit, is that if a person, and it's really kind of obvious, if a person spends their whole life thinking, for example, that cussing is okay, right? Just using that as an easy to use example. So every time something bad happens, they cuss up a storm. When they drop the f bomb like it was nothing. They just cuss, 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 right? So then they go into a nice fine dinner with some nice fine people wearing nice fine suits and everything. And while they are eating, the waiter comes by and accidentally drops a tray and it hits your foot, causing a significant amount of sudden, unexpected pain. So, what comes out of their mouth is generally speaking what they've been training themselves with. And they're going to say some kind of explicit language, I'm sure, right? On the flip side, if you spend your whole life training yourself that curse words are not okay. And by the way, I'm not arguing for the sinfulness or not sinfulness of using, the S word or whatever. But I'm just saying that if this is just an example of how you can train yourself. So you spend your whole life remembering that, curse words are not okay. I shouldn't try to offend somebody, and so you actively avoid using them in your everyday language. And that same waiter drops a tray, you're not going to curse, right? You might have some choice things to say, but it's not going to be four-letter words. And so it's the same thing with that person that cuts you off and you wish they were getting into a wreck. Is that if you train yourself to basically when that happens to say, and I try to do this. I actually will, if there's nobody else in the car, I will say this out loud. If not, I kind of just go through it in my mind. I say, you know what, I didn't really mean that I want that person to die. you know and I say that out loud so that then when the next person cuts me off, I'm less likely to have that initial thought because I'm training my reaction to things. We have the ability to do this, and that's actually a very, just like we can train a dog to behave in certain ways. We can, and the reason we can train animals to do things is we learn to trigger their emotional behavior on things, usually through reward or punishment. And it's the same thing with our own psyche. We can train ourselves through affirmation, primarily, and through our intellectual reaction to things as to how the proper reaction to something is. And the more you train yourself to react in a positive way, the more initially positive you're going to be. And so the real sin is the real sin, if you will, is the action, right? But then the subtle sin that Jesus talks about is the indulging in your mind. And the best thing to do to combat that is to train yourself otherwise. Joseph was a very patient man, probably. Maybe they could do hand stuff. Wow. I don't, I honestly, I do not believe that that was common practice. Generally speaking, the husband and wife would not touch each other in any kind of intimate way until after she has gone through puberty. And the thing is that, and I do think this is a superior method than today. People didn't get married out of emotion; they got married primarily out of negotiation and what was advantageous. Advantation. What gave them an advantage? You know what I'm trying to say. Parents won't even be around for high school graduation, let alone college. That is true. The right age to get married is 25 to 24 to 26. How about you just say 24 to 26? That was a weird way to put it. I disagree. I think the right age to get married is probably late teens, actually, probably mid teens. I think that getting married immediately. But here's the problem: we don't take marriage seriously, and we don't even know what marriage is anymore. Marriage today, the younger generations, it's just something you do with that person you think is really hot. And so then, and you get married because it gives you warm, fuzzy feelings. So what happens 6 years down the road when one of you has a tragedy in your life and you don't have any warm, fuzzy feelings? And so the other person's stressed because you don't have anything good to give them right now because you're too busy dealing with some crap that happened, like say your mom died or whatever, whatever bad things, and bad things will happen, right? Almost, if two people get married, I guarantee you the tragedy will hit one of them no matter what, and probably hit both of them at various times through the marriage. And when that happens, the person who experienced the tragedy is not going to have anything good to give, and it's up to the other person to be the good spouse. But what we do is we just get married for good feelings. So when there are no good feelings, we get the hell out. We're not interested. We say we grew apart. We fell out of love. Well, you don't get married because you're in love. If you're getting married because you're in love, your marriage is almost certainly doomed to fail. Love is not a warm, fuzzy feeling, the love that we're talking about for marriage. Agape love is a choice, it's a conscious, living decision. It's a decision that I make every single day that no matter what happens, no matter how bad things get, no matter how crazy the world may seem, I am going to do everything in my power to the point of death to take care of my wife. I have made that commitment, and I remake that commitment every single day. So, the right age to get married is very much, I think, the way that they did it back then. I think that we don't care about traditional. We say, oh, no, we need, feminism and all this other crap to make people feel better about themselves. Why do we need all this? Because we've lost the ability to feel good about doing good things. Because we've thrown God out of the mix. And so, why is it a good thing for the woman to take care of the kids or to cook or to manage the house? Why is it good for the man to go out and slave and work himself to death for his family? Why is that a good thing? It is a good thing. But we don't care about what God teaches us that He intends for us. Instead, we care about what I want. So, sure, yeah, kids are great, but man, that hot chick down the street, I kind of want some of that. So I'm out of here. And that happens all the time when men leave their families for some younger woman, right? It happens all the time because we're getting married for what's pleasing on the short term, what makes us happy. And if you get married for what makes you happy, your marriage will always fail. So I say the right age to get married is when the girl goes through puberty and the guy has established enough to take care of her, however old he may be. And then they can live a full, happy, healthy life together. What's a problem is people claiming to be Jesus. Huh? Josiah, you gotta, I don't know what happened there, but you gotta think about the order of words here because I don't know what you're even trying to say. What's a problem is people claiming to be Jesus. Now, if you're saying there's a problem with people claiming to be Jesus, I don't know anybody that's claiming to be Jesus right now. You have the occasional cult leader, but, I have no idea what you're trying to say. Texas also has recently passed a new law about food companies, if necessary, label said food products. This product contains ingredients not made for human consumption. Probably will be a matter of time. Are you saying? I'm not sure what you're saying. What will be a matter of time before they make food with products that are not intended for human consumption? I mean, you'd probably say that now. I'm sure. Before a law is, you say before, probably just a matter of time before a law is passed federally, as far as putting that on labels. Yeah, I'm sure the FDA, well, they're the regulating body on that kind of thing, Food and Drug Administration. I'm surprised if they haven't done that already. Probably will put an end to a lot of so-called food products in Texas. I don't know. I mean, I don't know specifically what you're talking about as far as ingredients that are not intended for human consumption. You know, I don't. I need an example of that. Vlad the Impaler versus Cotton Hill. Well, Vlad is a military leader with a huge army. Cotton Hill was a soldier, so Vlad wins. There's some people I bet I could train. There's some people I bet I could train with biscuits. Okay, train them to make biscuits. I don't quite get that. Oh, and Bill, I'm sorry I didn't see that. I don't know. My thing is not quite there, but I got a $10 super chat from Bill about a minute ago. So great discussions today. Thank you, Bill. I cannot thank you enough. When people super chat, I will tell you it means the world to me. Not just because hey, money is good, but because they care enough to sacrifice a little bit so that for my convenience, and that will go directly to paying bills. So thank you, my friend, because I desperately need it. Maybe too personal, but have your kids ever been married? No. You got married because she's knocked up and her dad has loaded 12 gauge. Well, that's not a good reason to get married either. And in fact, I will tell you, and this is something I fully admit I failed at, but I think that people I do know that have succeeded at it, it's so much better, is you should not have any kind of sexual relations until you're married. And I will tell you, because people talk about their body count and stuff, and the lower that number is, the better. Ultimately, it should be one, your spouse. And without pointing fingers at anybody, I will tell you that my wife's and my combined body count is three. so, but so one of us has had two. But but ultimately, it should be one, and the there's I'm not saying that there's no such thing as redemption and that if you've screwed around, oh, it's too late for you. But the if you can keep your body count to one as a lifetime number, you will be more fulfilled than any other number possible. And that's another problem. People think that sex is just a physical activity. They don't understand the beauty, the majesty, the spirituality of sex. And instead, they just think, that feels good when I do that. And so let's do that some more. They're basically being animals. They're doing it because it feels good and no other reason. Well, then you are missing 90% of it. They are doing those engineered meats. Are they doing the engineered meats in your area too? Oh, talking to Robert. Apparently, people have been noticing in grocery stores that meat is starting to have labels saying it's been engineered or something. Well, I remember Bird of Prey used to say he wants his meat to have a soul or something. I would say this, like, if you're talking about cloned meat or something like that, which I know is a possibility, I don't think has been done commercially at this point. you know, I don't know. I'm mixed on it because people say, "Oh, I want cows as nature intended." Cows are a genetically engineered creature. There's no such thing as a wild Holstein, right? They don't exist. Holsteins are an entirely man-made animal. We'd be eating nothing but bison and buffalo if, in fact, we were having something. And by the way, beef is better. I don't get me wrong. I don't hate bison, but beef I think is better. But yeah, if you eat nothing but venison and bison, then fine. Maybe but you can make that argument. But if you're saying you don't want engineered food, then don't eat any beef, or chicken, or turkey that you would get in a grocery store because that stuff is not the same as what occurs in wild. When was the last time you saw a wild chicken? Ask yourself that question. I'm not sure about there's fake plant-based burgers around here. Well, plant-based burgers are nothing new. Street Preacher says that those Beyond Beef, yeah, not those. The actual, this is actual meat, but evidently not come from a regular animal. I don't know. Is that even is cloned meat legal? I didn't think it was because that's what you're talking about. Let's see. Cloned meat derived from the offspring of animals created via somatic cell nuclear transfer is considered safe for human consumption by the FDA and Health Canada with no special labeling required. Primarily used for breeding to replicate elite livestock traits, cows, pigs, goats. These animals are rarely eaten themselves, but they're okay. So those are. So that's just using a cloned animal. Let's see. Okay, synthetic meat. Try that. Cultured or synthetic meat is real animal flesh produced in laboratories by cultivating animal cells in bioreactors, offering a sustainable, ethical alternative to traditional livestock farming. It is created without slaughter by nourishing cells to grow, potentially reducing land use by 96%. Let's see. Market and future. Well, not yet widely available in grocery stores. Products like lab-grown chicken and salmon have received regulatory approval in some markets. The industry is rapidly growing, with cultured meat projected to become a significant part of the global protein supply in the coming years. Let's see. Is lab-grown meat available in the U.S.? Yes, with companies like Upside Foods and Good Meat receiving permission in 2023. It's not yet widely available in the grocery stores, primarily being limited in restaurant settings in places like D.C. and San Francisco, while some states like Florida, Alabama, and Mississippi have enacted bans or restrictions on its sale. Yeah, it does. Then does KFC use lab grown meats? And the answer is no. No, 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 no. Yeah, it doesn't look like it's widely available anywhere. I'm trying to find where I can get some, but yeah, it doesn't. Let's see. Here's Upside Foods website. Let's see. The new meat. Delicious meat grown directly from animal cells, and they're mainly doing chicken here. It's science, but not rocket science. Ha ha ha. But the funny thing is, yeah, they're taking a genetically engineered animal and then making a genetically engineered meat product from the cells of the genetically engineered animal. Is it safe? Probably just as safe as eating a cow, I suppose. But I don't know. Josiah says, I meant you know what the problem what's you I meant you know what's the problem is people claiming to be Jesus. And I've not seen that as a problem generally. I mean, I'm not saying you should claim to be Jesus, but I don't know of that being a problem anywhere, at least not today. As far as I know, no food like that around here. Yeah, I haven't seen any either. Let's see. Jackie Chan versus Cotton Hill. Oh, Jackie Chan wins that easily because Cotton Hill has no shins. Well, I might be worried about chemistry. Let's see. Be a shame if you ended up not being compatible. Well, again, if it's just all it is, I mean, think about just from the sciencey perspective. There would be no difference between eating a sirloin steak and eating an artificial sirloin product, in that one is just grown in a cow and the other is grown in a vat of protein. But chemically it's identical. Now, it might be possible to make. I mean, like what would be great is if you could make the meat from like the tenderloin portion of the cow, except make it the size of a top sirloin. That would be awesome, and that would be entirely reasonable, I think. Do you think that God hates sinners, or that God loves the sinner and hates the sin? I just read Romans 5. Let me see what you're. I want to go to Romans 5. I don't know if I'll be able to pick out real quick what you're talking about, but let's see. Death through Adam. Okay, Romans 5 is a short little chapter, so let's take a look at Romans 5. Therefore, since we have been justified through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have gained access by faith into his grace, in which now we stand, and we boast of the hope of the glory of God. Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. And does hope not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit, which has been given to us? You see, at just the right time, when we are still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, some might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for this in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So, yeah, I think he is kind of talking about, like, it's the old churchy saying to say, love the sinner, hate the sin. But yeah, Christ didn't die for a bunch of people that weren't sinning, right? And let's see. Since we have not been justified by his blood, how much more shall we be saved from God's wrath through him? For blah, 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 blah. Look at yeah, so I think that this is kind of reinforcing that kind of a sentiment. Now, does that mean that God absolutely, unquestionably, unequivocally, and unconditionally loves everyone? That's between them and God. I don't know the honest answer, but it does appear, and you can see this based on what it says in Scripture, that God does pick and choose favorites from time to time. But and a perfect example of this would be Jacob and Esau, where he says in a couple of passages, both Old and New Testament, that he loved Jacob more than Esau. Now, the actual English translation says that he loved Jacob and hated Esau, but if you look at the Hebrew word that it's based on, the word doesn't mean hate in the contemporary way. It means that he loved him less. Now, I don't think we have any examples of God truly hating humans as much as he hates what we do, and he hates our acts of rebellion. So I would say that you're right in that the hates the sin, loving the sinners. But love doesn't mean total forgiveness all the time. It doesn't mean that there's no repercussion for sin. So sometimes people will sin and they will be punished for said sin. And so just because God, it's just like if you have a child that breaks the house rules, right? And you say you have to be home by 10 o'clock, right? And then your kid comes home at midnight. Well, then you're going to, it doesn't mean you don't love your child, but it does mean you're going to probably punish your child, right? And so you're grounded for a week or whatever. So so there's a difference. You know, some people think, well, if God loves everybody, why do some people go to hell? Well, they go to hell because they refuse to accept Christ as the person who sacrificed himself for them. And it's really that simple. Salty is such a romantic. I talk about not getting married for feelings, but I am a romantic. I do believe in love. I just don't believe that the emotional love feeling is sufficient cause to enter into or a marital relationship. In fact, it's a horrible reason to. Bill says sin. I'm not sure why. And then, but true enough, we've already altered everything anyway. Yeah, cows do not, cows as we see them, beef cows do not exist in the wild and never have. They're hybrid creatures that we've developed, from some kind of buffalo-like creature. Weird food cubes in TOS, except few times are natural soap. Apparently, yeah. In Star Trek 6, we saw the Enterprise was fully functional kitchen. Yeah, and like even if you go back as far as one of the earliest episodes, Charlie X, in which the chief of the galley contacts Kirk, and no, Kirk sends a message to the chief of galley saying that he wants the synthetic meatloaf to be shaped like turkey for Thanksgiving. So they're using synthetic meat, right? So probably something akin to what you were just reading about. And that I would dare argue that probably the synthetic meat on the Enterprise, the TOS Enterprise, probably tasted better than replicated meat from TNG. I think the lab meat is Bill Gates' conspiracy. He wants to sell lab meat and bypass the existing food industry. If that were the case, I think there's more efficient ways to do it than lab meat, because one of the big problems with lab meat is it's too expensive because it costs too much to produce. Pike has a whole Benihana in his quarters. That is true. I wonder if he can do the onion volcano. I have no idea what that means. Mr. Miyagi versus Grasshopper from Kung Fu. Here's the problem. You would think, like, because Mr. Miyagi, we've actually seen pull some moves. I don't remember. No, it's not Grasshopper. Well, or unless are you talking about the main character from Kung Fu? I thought when you say Grasshopper, I think about the old teacher, the Shaolin teacher. I can't remember his name, but just that he calls Master. But Grasshopper would be David Carradine's character. And so if you're talking about David Carradine versus Mr. Miyagi, I'm going to give it to Mr. Miyagi. But if it's David Carradine's Master versus Mr. Miyagi, I'm going to give it to the Master. I know he does somehow Street Preacher. Stranger Worlds reboot perhaps takes place in an alternate universe. I think it's a reboot, but, they haven't said it officially. Romans 5:8 specifically, which is, God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. 100%. And so I do think that shows that God does love bad people. Robert says not a fan of new Trek. You know, I don't differentiate old Trek, new Trek because there's good Trek and bad Trek in. Well, when I think of old Trek, I usually think of TOS, but I know most people think of TNG era. But I think there's good and bad in the TNG era and in the modern era. So I don't differentiate. I just look at good versus bad because I think Voyager is a bad Trek show. I think that Starfleet Academy is a bad Trek show. But I think Strange New Worlds and Deep Space Nine are good Trek shows. So new Trek should be hauled away as garbage. No, that's the Enterprise, remember? Do you get preferential treatment if you never do sin? There is nobody that never sins. The only person who has lived a sinless life is Christ himself, according to the Bible, at least. So I guess you would, you know, and that's kind of the point because if you did not sin, if you never sinned your entire life, then you would get preference. You could go into the kingdom without, being a Christian even. You would because you've never sinned. Therefore, you would not have anything to condemn you. You would go into paradise. The problem is that's simply not the case for anybody. Like if you're the least sinning person to ever live compared to someone who sins a lot but probably asks for forgiveness and everything. Uh, the only thing that determines whether or not you go to condemnation versus paradise is whether or not you accept Christ. Period. End of discussion. Now, there's the second judgment, which it talks about where you're judged based on your works. And in that judgment, it seems like it will determine the level of reward in paradise, or even the degree of punishment in what we like to call hell. Either way, the as far as if you're the person who sins the very least and you are a Christian, then you're going to get the best spot ever in paradise. Gold medal USA versus Canada. I'm going to say US because we're awesome. And then he says crap, probably because I'm right. Star Wars versus Star Trek. People used to say Trek has no chance, but I've seen recent videos saying the curb stomp is the other way. I don't know. Oh, absolutely. Okay, so if you're talking about straight up fighting, I've done stuff on this in the past, and whenever I have some time, and especially because now that I'm learning more about advanced mathematics, I'm going to be showing the numbers. It is not even close. It's not even remotely close because if you look at here I'll do this. Why not? Move this over here so hopefully you guys will be able to see it. Never done this before, but I'll slide this over just a hair. Here we go. All right, so let's grab a black one. All right. So if you have a Imperial Star Destroyer, right? That's the big triangular ship that is the mainstay of the Imperial fleet. Now, the Imperial Star Destroyer has a wing of about 60 TIE fighters. So that's you have one Star Destroyer and 60 TIEs, right? So that's your fighting force for the Empire versus a Constitution class starship. So one starship. Now a Constitution class starship, based on canonical sources, has up to. Now, granted, I know that Strange New Worlds does it their own way, but we're not talking about that right now. But Constitution class starship has up to 4 shuttlecraft. So it's 4 shuttles. All right. So that's a 4. Okay, there we go. So far, it looks pretty one-sided in favor of the Empire because the Star Destroyer is many times larger than a starship. if I remember correctly, Star Destroyer is about 3,000. Or no, it's not that long. I'm trying to remember. But it's multiple magnitudes larger physically. And then you have 60 launch vehicles versus four. So it's not even close as far as that's concerned in favor of the Empire. But here's where the rub of all of this. So the Star Destroyer's primary weapon is what is called a turbo laser, right? Now, I understand a turbo laser is not actually a laser, it is a plasma weapon that uses lasers to energize the plasma. And let me just take a quick look because I don't want to be inaccurate. How many? Okay. Star Destroyer has 60 heavy turbo lasers, and then 60 ion cannons and 10 tractor beams. All right, so you have 60 turbo lasers, 60 ion cannons, and 10 tractor beams. All right, so that's the armaments of just the Star Destroyers. Then each of the TIE fighters has an additional two turbo lasers, twin turbo lasers mounted forward. And so if we add that to it, that's going to be another 120 turbo lasers. Even though the TIE fighter turbo lasers aren't as powerful, we're just going to count them anyway. So this is our total armament for the Imperial side. On the Federation side, a Constitution class starship has 7 phaser banks, 3 on the top of the saucer, 3 on the bottom of the saucer, 1 in the rear. So we have 7 phasers. And then we have 2 photon torpedo launchers, 1 forward and 1 aft. So 2 photon torpedoes. All right. So again, it looks hugely in favor of the Empire as far as the sheer number and of weapons. Now we're going to get into the problems. A turbo laser on screen, and from everything we've seen, has a maximum range of no more than 60 kilometers. And that's based on, by the way, that's assuming they have the most advanced turbo lasers that we've seen in Star Wars, which were from the sequel trilogy. And so those turbo lasers had a maximum range of about 60 kilometers. Same is true of the ion cannons. And so, and by the way, there's a reason for all this before you think it's crazy. All their weapons are plasma based. Plasma based weaponry has a significant problem, and that is called limited range, because as soon as the plasma ejects, then it begins to lose its structural integrity, if you will. And over time, it just becomes weaker and weaker and weaker, which means that once it's traveled about 60 kilometers, it can't even penetrate basic shields, which we saw in The Last Jedi. So, so it has a maximum effective range of about 60 kilometers for all of these weapons. The tractor beam, we haven't really gotten something clear to show the maximum range on, at least not that I know of. But we'll give it, just to be fun, we'll give it 100 kilometers. We haven't seen anything act beyond that kind of a sphere. So all these weapons combined, so we'll say that, if you got 10 tractor beams, oh, I forgot, you also have 3 tractor beams on a Constitution, 2 in the front, 1 in the rear. This is all based on screen canon. You can double check me if you want to rewatch the original series, but you don't want to fight with me on the original series. Anyway, and this is all based on an original series Constitution. This is not TNG or anything like that. So, so the tractor beams for the Empire and the tractor beams for the Federation are roughly equivalent we haven't seen really. We know they can hold a ship in place. We know that they can pull a ship in, and we know that they can be used to tow a ship. We've seen all of that on screen. And so the tractor beams are good, but they're also relatively short range. But we'll give a little bit of a buffer to the Empire, so we'll say 100 kilometers. So that means that from the Star Destroyer's perspective, you have, and by the way, the nice thing about the Star Destroyer is that it has weapons mounted all over it, right? While it has 60 turbo lasers, you'd say basically 30 on each side, and then they're spread in an arc that covers that entire side, top and bottom. So probably 15 on top, 15 on the bottom of each side. So there's no way to approach a Star Destroyer and be completely safe. But that means you have a sphere around the Star Destroyer of roughly 100 kilometers, in which if you enter that sphere, you are dead. And so, because once you hit the 100 kilometer, they can put a tractor beam on you. Once they hold you in place, all they got to do is move until they're within 60 kilometers. One barrage from the turbo lasers. Oh, by the way, if you have shields up, one barrage from the ion cannons, take down your shields. Because the ion cannon, the beauty of the ion cannon is it basically just stops all power from working on your ship. So one barrage from the ion cannon, your shields are gone. One barrage from the turbo lasers, your ship is incinerated. End of fight. Right? So that's easy. However, on the Constitution side, right? So we have I'm going to draw a really crude Constitution class starship here. Similarly, it has a full 360-degree defensive sphere because its phasers on the top and bottom of the saucer. There's two to the port, two to the starboard, two to the front, and so that covers most of the area around a Constitution, and then the rear phaser bank covers anything directly behind it, and so you can't really approach the from any direction and be safe. However, this is where the problem begins for the Empire. Because on screen, we're not talking about making stuff up, and we're talking about original series Constitution class. Our maximum range is 100,000 kilometers compared to 100. It's a little bit of a problem here. So literally 1,000 times the range of the Star Destroyer. And not only that, but as far as, and that's for phasers. For the photon torpedo, from what and this is, I'm only going with on-screen canon, I'm not going by what books or anything like that says. Photon torpedoes don't quite have the range of the phasers. They have a range from on-screen cannon of 80,000 kilometers. So, at 100,000, they can pelt you with phasers. Within 80,000, they hit you with a matter-antimatter missile. And the basic tactic of a Federation ship is that you use the phasers to wear down enemy shields. Once the shields are down, a single torpedo can devastate almost any ship. Something the size of a Star Destroyer, you'd probably launch a barrage of about five or so torpedoes, and that Star Destroyer is done. So, so the only defense that you possibly have for the Star Destroyer is to get within 100 kilometers of the starship. But how are you going to do that? Because the starship is just going to be pelting you from 100,000. It's not going to let you get anywhere near it. Now, you can argue about the relative speeds of the ships, but as sublight speeds, starships are a lot faster than Star Destroyers from what we've seen. And I'm not going to get into all the numbers, but again, it's a huge factor where we've seen the impulse drives on screen can do speeds of at least 3/4 the speed of light, whereas on the Star Destroyers, the speed can be measured in kilometers per second, and it's not a huge number. So, safe to say that at sublight speeds, the ship is going to be able to keep its distance. And we know that Imperial ships cannot have combat while in hyperspace. And hyperspace jumps you can't do in, just in circles around a ship in close combat maneuvers. It doesn't work that way. However, warp drive does work that way, which means even if you did a hyperspace jump, then the starship can immediately do a warp drive because they don't have to do advanced calculations every time you go to warp. So you're going to have a real problem here getting within range. The only thing you can possibly do is launch your 60 fighters, and attempt to swarm the starship with your fighters, keeping it occupied until you get your Star Destroyer within range. Problem there is that, again, with the distance involved, the fighters only travel at a speed of, I think they accelerate at a speed of about 60 kilometers per second squared, right? So fighters can accelerate at 60 kilometers per second squared. So at that rate, and I did do the math at one point, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but it would take several minutes for the fighters to get, in fact, at the base speed, it would take hours, if not days, for the fighters to get from the Star Destroyer to the starship. And we've actually seen this problem in movies like The Last Jedi, where the fighters are going back and forth between the two fleets. The fighters are not super duper fast like impulse drive. And so, even if the fighters could bridge that distance, well, if it takes a couple of minutes for them to get there, phasers are incredibly efficient from what we've seen on screen of taking out an individual target. We saw that in a matter of a couple of seconds when Spock was able to detect a 1 meter long object, namely Nomad, Kirk immediately told Sulu to lock on. It was at 80,000 kilometers distance. That's how we know the range of the photon torpedo. And so Kirk just says, lock on. Sulu hits a button and they're locked on. They fire, direct hit. So hitting these TIE fighters moving in a straight line towards them is going to be relatively simple. Now, hitting them with torpedoes might be more difficult if the fighters are constantly evading, but hitting them with phasers is going to be child's play. And so at that point, there's no way to bridge that gulf. The fighters will all be taken down before they get there. And meanwhile, and once the fighters are gone, then the starship just wears down the shields. And after a little bit, Star Destroyer is toast. It is not just, it is an embarrassment for the Empire. There is no conceivable way for the Empire to win this battle. All right, so that's my short version of that. Maybe I'll do a long form version of that in the future. I know I didn't really do any math, but you guys get the idea. Let's see. TOS is old Trek, not a fan of Starfleet Academy, but it's still Trek. Yeah, I'm not a fan of Starfleet Academy either, but I'm not going to sit there and say, it's not Star Trek. Well, it is, but it's just not good Star Trek. But I would say the same thing, granted, I do think Academy is worse, but I would say the same thing about Voyager. I think it's bad Star Trek as well. The first couple of seasons of TNG, really bad Star Trek. So, it's not exclusive to the Kurtzman era to have bad Star Trek. The only person that is closest to what you were saying about someone who doesn't sin much would be John the Baptist, and he was even needed salvation. Yeah, John the Baptist was not a sinful guy. He dedicated his entire life to preparing the way for Jesus, and yeah, he still needed a savior. Everybody does. And Jesus even said, of all the men who were born of women, there's none greater than John the Baptist. She says, Professor Salty. Yes, eventually. Actually, it'll be Dr. Salty once I get my degrees, but yeah. In the battle, Spaceball 1 versus Vader's Super Star Destroyer. I think the Spaceball 1 would probably not last long against anything from the Star Wars galaxy. But, the one chance that they would have is that Vader and everybody would be just like bent over laughing at it so much that they might get a chance. With models, they could never really do realistic ship movement, but with CGI, they could properly simulate how thrusters and rocket drives would work when flying 360 degrees. I disagree to a point because if you look at movies like Star Trek II, the ship movement was pretty good. Not perfect, but it was pretty good. Yes, they still do things that are obviously unrealistic, like banking a curve like we see in the Mutara Nebula. Because truth is, like if you were in the Mutara Nebula, you have to kind of hold this to get that. So, when so you have the Reliant here, and it's man, that's hard to see. We'll go back to the black one. So, all right. So we got the Reliant, and it's on this trajectory, right? And there was at one point in the battle that Spock said that he detected Reliant, and the Enterprise was trying to, and it could be them. And so the Enterprise is, say, going this way, right? And so we have, and they cross paths, they detect each other. Now, what we see in the movie is the Enterprise then just makes this arcing curve to come around and comes up behind the Reliant and to fire on them. And it's a really beautiful shot and all that, and it's absolutely gorgeous. But the truth is that that in space, the Enterprise could just pivot to face the direction of the Reliant and just immediately start firing while it's still moving in that direction, but putting thrust in so that it basically slows down and then starts moving in the direction of the Reliant very quickly, especially with things like inertial dampeners and stuff like that that they show on the show. But and so the geometry of it would be much simpler, but the majesty of the big banking turn and stuff is just so beautiful cinematically that that's why we do it. Wesley Crusher versus Ray Palpatine. Who wins in a infuriation contest? Oh, I think Ray takes the cake on that one. The only Star Trek character that even comes close to Ray is Michael Burnham. That's why I use Star Furies in Babylon 5, most accurate portrayal in a space fighter. I would dare say, I think Star Furies are pretty good, but I think that Vipers in the remake of Battlestar Galactica are probably the most realistic. And Stan says, well, someone said the Babylon 5 squadron producers did consult with experts to make sure their Star Fury fighter ships would appear to move realistically as possible. I don't doubt that, but you know what? Just because they hire an expert doesn't seem. I wish I was making this up. There actually is an astrophysicist who works for Paramount in their Star Trek division right now. I saw her on a thing with Neil deGrasse Tyson, and I was like blown away. I didn't think they actually had someone because of how bad most of the physics are. And she was actually talking about something that was in Starfleet Academy. And so I was like, oh, geez, you mean you actually had a physicist there and they still do this badly? I'm wondering how did she pass her classes? You know, they also had the physicist. I saw the physicist that was a consultant for Big Bang. And then let's see. If you remember, they actually did a lot of rotating and directioning changes. You're talking about in Babylon 5, they did. But they also did, like, go back and watch, like, one of my favorites is from, I think it's season 3 of Battlestar Galactica, when they send a mission to the the Cylon resurrection ship, and the Viper literally flies sideways, and as it's getting pictures and stuff through the resurrection ship. It's really cool because obviously a direction of momentum and is not dependent on the direction your ship faces, right? It's just that to change momentum, you need to apply thrust. And if you have a primary thruster in the back of the ship, then you turn the ship in the direction you want to thrust, and then you hit the thrust. And they do that in Battlestar Galactica really effectively. They did it on Babylon 5 as well, but I think partially because the visual effects are on just another level, I like it better in Battlestar Galactica. All right, and then Street Preacher says, rather than doing bank turns, yeah, that's what Star Wars is all about. World War II in space, and that looks horrible as far as realism is concerned. Whereas Babylon 5 and Battlestar Galactica try to do it more like you're moving in a 360-degree zero G environment with no air resistance either. All right, so maybe next time we'll do a full breakdown of like a battle. That would be kind of fun. Hey, let's do that sometime. But anyway, I got to run now, but you guys have a good one. Take care. God bless, and I'll see you at some point.